Hello and welcome to the Journeys with PDA Coffee Chat podcast, where we seek community connection and co-regulation while chatting about all things PDA.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to Journeys with PDA Coffee Chat podcast. I'm Heather.
And I'm Kerissa. And today we have with us horror and suspense author J.D. Barker. If you're a fan of horror suspense genre, you may be familiar with his work. He's written several novels and short stories, including The Fourth Monkey and Among Us. He's also collaborated with fellow authors James Patterson and Dacre Stoker. Most recently, it was announced that he would pen a reboot novel to the 1990s movies Flatliners. Well, all that is very impressive. What brings us together on this last Friday, the 13th of 2024, is that JD shares something near and dear to Heather and I, and that is being late diagnosed autistic. JD, welcome to our humble little podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's pretty exciting for Heather and I to be able to connect and talk to other autistic people. And I think that it's very encouraging to be able to see that there are autistic people who are very successful and doing things that they really enjoy. So we just would love to chat about how being autistic and creativity and working and publishing and just all of those things that come together for you.
Well, I was, like you mentioned, I was late diagnosed. So I was born in the 70s. And back then, if you had any type of issue, you were kind of the weird kid in the corner. They, sort of shunned you. Like, other kids wouldn't talk to you. But the adults didn't like make an effort really to try and seek out, a particular issue or diagnose anything. So you just kind of learned to deal with it, which is more or less what I did. I didn't even know I was autistic until my 20s. But in school, I was kind of an early bloomer. I was reading by the time I was 3. By the time I got into kindergarten, I had read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew books and moved on to like Charles Dickens and some of the classics. Really good with math. I grew up without a television in the house, so we were hitting the library at a very early age. But outside of the academic part, I was terrible at like the rest. I had zero social skills. I couldn't communicate with other kids. I had a hard time with conversations. I didn't like to play with other kids. I didn't understand, the things that they considered to be fun weren't fun for me. Had no idea why. But I went through elementary school like that, went through high school like that, got through college. I ended up with, I got multiple degrees. I got a degree in finance, another one in business. I got halfway through a psychology degree, ended up entering the corporate world. And over several years, I worked in finance and worked my way up the corporate ladder. And I was a chief compliance officer for a brokerage firm. Down in Florida, which is one of those jobs. It's as horrible as it sounds, but it pays really well. So somebody has to do it. But it was perfect for me because essentially I was in charge of making sure that every transaction that flowed through this brokerage firm adhered to all the regulatory requirements that the SEC laws and everything governing the financial industry. I basically had to take every trade that was processed and run it against all these rules and regs to make sure nobody did anything wrong. So that was working with data. I was great with data. Anything that had structure had a formula to it. I was good at playing the piano. I could write computer code, and anything like that I had no problem with. Where I ran into issues is, if I found a trade that I had to talk to somebody about, all of a sudden I had to leave my office and I had to go and actually talk to a human being. And that was a problem. And my boss, I think, recognized the fact that I was good at a portion of my job, but I was terrible at the people portion. And just like me, he had no idea why. He actually thought that it was an anger issue, because I would get frustrated. So he ultimately, rather than fire me like some people probably would have, he sent me to anger management classes, thinking that was going to help, fix whatever was going on with me. So I sat down with a therapist for the initial, like basically a consult meeting. We were supposed to talk for an hour. We got about 20 minutes into it, and she stopped and she said, "Have you ever been tested for autism?" And, again, I had no idea what that really was. I mean, aside of seeing, I saw that movie Rain Man with Tom Cruise. That was like the extent of my experience in that world. But she started pointing out little things. She said, "Well, this entire time we've been talking, you haven't made eye contact with me. I've noticed that your thumb and forefinger, every time you think, you rub your thumb and forefinger together." And she just started pointing out all these little things, and it made me super self-conscious, but at the same time I realized that she actually understood what was happening. Ultimately, she asked if I was willing to be tested, so I underwent a number of tests, and they came up with a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. In today's world, you're just on the spectrum. Back then they put a name to it. It really doesn't matter one way or the other. But from my standpoint, all of a sudden now I had a problem that I could solve, which was something I was good at. You put a puzzle in front of me, I'm going to find a solution to that puzzle. So I started researching everything related to it. This therapist, helped me, deal with a lot of the social anxiety and the problems that I had on that front. In a lot of ways, she kind of taught me to fake my way through social situations, which I'm guessing you've probably talked about mimicking and things like that. But I learned to make eye contact in a conversation. I learned to laugh when other people laughed. I learned to basically fit in, visibly fit in, even though in my head, I was still basically, I was playing a role. I was playing the role of the person, in that particular situation. And it, flash, that was roughly 30 years ago. So I've had about 30 years of practice. And I find that the more I do it, the easier it gets, but there's always, it's always there. Like, it doesn't go away. It's funny. I'm married now. We just had our 10-year anniversary. And my wife knows that if I don't make eye contact with her, during a conversation, I'm actually paying attention. If I look her in the eye when we're arguing, she knows I'm not paying attention.
Right.
So
yeah.
Yeah, so over time, I've learned how to deal with all that. While I was in the corporate world, writing was always my go-to. It's a solitary thing. I think anybody that's autistic, we all have our little happy place, and for me, writing was that thing. So I would come home at night and I would work on books. I would write, work with other people. I had basically a side hustle as what's called a ghostwriter and a book doctor. So I would help other people get their books published. I did that for 20 some years, and during that time, I ended up with 6 different books that hit the New York Times list that all had other people's names on the cover. And one of the reasons I was good at this, particularly the ghostwriting thing, is because not only could I mimic people in a social situation, but I learned that I could mimic people on paper. If you took a book and put it in front of me, or somebody wrote, a couple chapters of something, I could read that, and then I could continue that story and mimic their vocabulary, their voice, their cadence, and basically to the point where it's indistinguishable. So I had a really good side job of basically doing that, finishing books for other people, writing memoirs for politicians, for sports figures. So that was essentially my first foray into the writing world. And it's something I wouldn't have been able to do without autism. I mean, one of the things that therapist, really pointed out to me, we sat down and we made a list. Here are all the things that, I felt were wrong, things that I needed to fix. And I don't know if that's even the right term for it, because I don't know if this is really a right or wrong thing, but the things that were different about me, but there were negative ones and then there were positive ones. And once we figured out what those positive ones were, I doubled down on those. I learned to use them. In today's world, my wife calls them my superpowers, because there's things that I can do that other people can't. I'm a New York Times bestseller, and I wouldn't be there today without autism.
Right. And it's so interesting because when I was reading, we don't usually do a lot of research on who we have on because we're just so busy. But I went into, your Wikipedia page and, just to get some background information. And one of the biggest questions I had when I was reading it is, how does someone become a ghostwriter? How does a book fixer do this? But you explained it so eloquently, and it's, your autism allows you to go in and mimic and basically, produce literature the way the author that you're working with would do as well.
Yeah, I mean, where it really started is back when I was in college. I worked for BMG, which is a distribution company for the record labels. And I was essentially a glorified babysitter. So they would have a recording artist come into town, and I would have to pick that person up at the airport and get them to the radio station for their interviews, get them to their concert, get them to their hotel, and then ultimately put them back on an airplane. And I had student loans that were racking up at the same time. And I realized I had people like Madonna in the car with me for a week or so. So I turned around and I started to interview those people. And then I would take those interviews and sell them to magazines like 17 and Teen Beat and Teen People. And over time, you quickly learn, like if you're working with newspapers and magazines, virtually everybody in that industry has a novel that they've been writing. It's at some stage of development. It's in a desk drawer somewhere. They've been working on it for 10 years. It's 500,000 words long. They need a little help with it. And because grammar is, again, it's another set of rules, like I have them all, ingrained in my head. I was able to pick up a manuscript and I could easily fix it for grammar, punctuation, and that kind of thing. And then it just evolved from there. Once I learned I could mimic other people's voices, and I would sit down with the celebrity, they could tell me their story, their life story, and I could put it down on paper in their voice, which is something that was a really a unique gift. It's not something very many people can do.
Right. That's fascinating.
But as I moved on into fiction, I kind of doubled down on that as well, because when I create characters, they are other people to me. And I'm able to develop them to the point where they feel very real to me.
Yeah.
I'm able to communicate in their voice, and I can follow their story. I understand where they're going to go with that particular situation and follow through with it on paper.
So what brought about that change when you left your corporate job? And I guess, like, what was that next step? And then how did you get into being a full-time author?
So we had a very big leap of faith. So I had mentioned that I had 6 different books that hit the New York Times list. When that happens and it's got somebody else's name on the cover, but you actually wrote the book, it gets really old after a while. So when that 6th one hit, my wife pulled me aside. She said, "Listen, I know you want to become a full-time author. Let's figure out a way to make this happen." But we were kind of stuck because the job that I had a big salary, and as a result, we had a nice house, we had cars, we had a boat. Our lifestyle was expensive, so we couldn't just pick up and walk away from that. So she came up with this crazy plan. We sold everything that we owned. We bought a duplex in Pittsburgh. She had family there. We rented out one side of the duplex and we lived in the other side, and basically got our expenses down to pretty much nothing. And then one day we sat down at the kitchen table, we looked at the bank statement, and she said, "Okay, we've got, some savings here. It looks like you've got about 18 months to make the writer thing work. Go." Nothing like putting your feet to the fire.
No pressure there.
No, but the thing is, being autistic, I fall into patterns, so
Sure.
like going to that corporate job, as much as I hated it, I would have continued to do it, and I would still be doing it today if she hadn't taken me out of my comfort zone and forced me to make that change. So kudos to her for doing it. It was a scary
Amazing
thing. I don't think I
partner.
could do it again, but we ended up doing that.
Well, I think that it makes such a huge impact for an autistic person to have people around us who can see the positive. Because I think as an autistic person, we do tend to get kind of wrapped up in like the negative, or like where we feel like we fall short. And so you're talking about, you had the therapist who could help you see the positive, and your wife who was like, I believe that you can do this. Let's put together a plan. And so having those people around us who can see that positive sounds like that was a huge piece that helped, things come together for you.
Yeah, it never would have happened without her. And it's funny because when we first started dating, that same like fake persona that I could put on in public, I did that on dates.
Sure.
I think we probably all have been there.
Uh-huh.
And you can pull it off for a date, 4, 5, 6 hours or so at a time. But when you get to the point where you're living with somebody, now it's 24/7. When I knew we were heading in that direction, we had to sit down and we had to have the talk. I had to explain, what was really going on in my head, what was happening. And I wouldn't have blamed her if she had picked up and walked away. I had plenty of girlfriends prior to that did, because it's not something everybody wants to deal with. But again, to her credit, we talked it out, and we decided to try and make a go of it. We found another therapist that worked, with couples, that was kind of a mediator between the two of us, because we're both very different. But we've learned that communication is just key, to all of this,
Yeah.
and we come at everything from completely different directions. We've got a 7-year-old daughter now. And, so something will come up, and like, I'll weigh in, with, pretty much the, Mr. Spock, completely logical answer. And she'll come at it from this emotional standpoint. But we, rather than, going towards one direction or the other, we kind of hash that out together and come up with something in the middle that seems to work. And we do that all the time. And I think if we didn't, I don't think we would be together today.
I feel like we have very, very, very similar lives. Communication is the key. When you are in a relationship, and, my husband is not neurodivergent. He's neurotypical, neuronormative, and that community. And just as you had said, in dating, you can fake it. You can mask for a really long time. But when you start living with somebody 24/7, it gets a little exhausting, and that mask slips. And I didn't know at the time that I was autistic when my husband and I first met, and when we got married, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, I feel like we live very, very parallel lives when it comes to that whole communication key.
I think anybody who's not on the spectrum, or not in this world, they don't understand what masking really is, and how draining it could be. Like the way I tried to describe it is I'm operating at 11, like I'm dialed up to 11, running on turbo the entire time I'm doing it. And the second I stop, I crash.
Yes.
I need downtime. I've got to recharge those batteries. I can't keep it up 24/7.
Yeah. That's exactly. And then I marry into my husband, who knew how to rest, who was like, no, it's okay to take little breaks periodically. And I'm like, what? What is this you are talking? What is a break? What is rest? I don't understand. Yeah. So I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah. And then also that the disconnect between communication, it's so difficult, whether you're talking about at work or with your family, with your kids. And being autistic brings this whole different perspective, and sort of that I'm the very like logical, let's just like go by the rules, very to the point. And so trying to figure out that communication. And I know for us, a lot of it is like pause, and my husband has to kind of be like, oh, okay, like what is going on? What is your perspective here? Because it doesn't always match up. And so if I'm super intense and very like determined or impassioned about something, sometimes he'll have to go, wait, are you mad? Where are you on this? Like, what's going on? Because there's that disconnect. And so if we don't make it just the standard that, okay, am I reading everything correct? If we don't stop, then like, yeah, how would you stay together? You have to pause and kind of go, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What is your perspective? And so we just have an agreement where always pausing to clarify like what's going on, and what it is that I'm trying to say, or what it is that he's trying to get me to understand, and just knowing our perspectives are very different.
It's hard enough to do it in person, and now in today's world, you've got text messages and other things which really can muddy up those waters.
I would much
absolutely
rather communicate with somebody via Zoom, so I can personally, so I can catch like what their facial expressions might be, to make sure I'm, gauging that I'm understanding what they're saying back and forth. I don't.
Yeah, one of the weirdest things I've noticed, and I guess basically since COVID, because Zoom just became so popular with COVID, but the eye contact thing, I've got zero problem dealing with that on Zoom. But
Right.
it's like my brain understands that I'm not actually looking at that person.
And
But
and
like
now
in real life, like I have to literally tell myself, make eye contact, make eye
oh,
contact. Like that is
absolutely.
droning on in my head in order to
I
do it.
remember one time I read this article that if you stared intently at somebody, it meant that you were like into them, right? That you passionate, that you love. So I spent like a week just staring at my husband until finally he's like, "You're really creeping me out. Like, can we stop with the staring?" But it's like this mental game of, how long do I look? When do I divert? When do I do this? How do I pay attention? How do I, it's exhausting. But you're absolutely right. On camera, on the screen, that's just gone. And I keep getting these ads in my Facebook, in the feed, where it's like this little camera that you can put on your computer screen so that it will divert your eyes to the person that you're speaking to. And I'm going, who needs that? That just happens automatically. Like, really? We need a camera for that? But apparently some people do. I don't need that.
So how would you say like your communication style as an autistic person, how does that work because now you're an author and you do interviews and there are people who want to talk with you, and so how is that experience? And especially if you were talking to say somebody young like my kids who think, well, I can't go out and be a famous author because how will I do book signings? How will I do interviews? So, what would you say to people who want to go out and be able to do things in the world that requires communication and socializing, but they are autistic?
Well, one of the things that I learned years back with that therapist, one of the first things that we worked on is she taught me that dealing with any of these situations is very much like exercising, like going to the gym. The more often I do it, the easier it gets. So I purposely put myself into scenarios that are uncomfortable for me, because it gets easier and easier. Like I've got a weekly podcast that I do as well called Writers Inc., where we interview pretty much every big name author that's out there has been on the show, a couple of times at this point. But I hated it at the beginning, and that was why I did it, because I by forcing myself to do it, it got easier and easier. But the ironic thing about, what I do for, being, quote unquote famous is, like, I'll give you an example. I was just in Budapest, and I was there it's the first time I've ever been there. My books have been there for years. I've had 6 or 7 that have come out in that country, but I had never visited before. So I went for the first time, and I had one talk that I was scheduled to do. I was only on the ground for a day and a half. We had a little over 1,000 people that showed up for my interview and my talk and book signing and stuff that was supposed to happen after. And I am totally comfortable in those situations. And I think it's mainly because if I'm on stage in front of a large group, I'm more or less giving a presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm playing a part. I'm playing the role of an author. So I can drop myself into that role. I can tell the same stories over and over again and make them sound as if it's the first time I'm telling those stories. I can react to I know when the crowd is going to laugh. I know when they're going to applaud. I've got all of that dialed in, and it's memorized, to the point where I can tweak that script and change it for the next time. So that is very easy to me. Even when I do a signing, fans tend to, they say a lot of the same things. You're my favorite author. This is my favorite book. They're super nervous, which is I find find funny, like they're shaking and stuff, which I don't get. But it's complete opposite for me. Like that, I'm totally comfortable doing that because it's such a repetitive thing. It doesn't matter what country I'm in, it's always the same thing over and over again. So I'm comfortable with that. Now, if you flip that to, back to my day life, about 2 weeks ago, we went to a party at our neighbor's house, completely unscripted. We had to walk over there. There were a bunch of people just hanging out. I had to stand in small little groups. I had to, make small talk. I had to laugh when other people were laughing. To me, that was extremely stressful, far worse than standing in front of a crowd of 1,000 people. And I've been dealing with this for 30 some years since I got diagnosed. It's never gotten easier. Like I've learned to fake my way through it, and I think make my differences less noticeable to other people. But those things that those little alarm bells that go off in the back of my head, like they still go off. So I don't think that's ever going to go away.
What are some of the supports, accommodations? What are some of the things that you might pre-plan or structure to make it possible for you to, say, travel, speak, or mostly, like, what are the things maybe that you have put into your life for the daily? Like, okay, we're going to the neighbors, we're going to do this social thing, because the people who are listening to us and the people in our community, one of the big questions is, well, what if my partner, my spouse, my child, what if they do want to go over to the neighbors for this casual barbecue? And so what are things that I can do for them to make it possible, or to be able to travel, speak, to do the things that they want to do, but they're just really hard. What are some of the things that you have built into your life to make those possible?
I mean, in general, I try to give myself downtime either before or after any of those events. I do that whenever I can, but in my life, that's not always possible. So if you take, like, again, the Budapest trip, I'm on the ground for a day and a half. It's very expensive to get me from the U.S. to Budapest for a day and a half. So the publishers and the other people, that I work with on that side, they take, every second is important. They make the most of my time that I'm there. So I'm essentially ferried from the airport, to maybe a bookstore where I have to give a talk. And from there, I go to a radio station or a television station. So aside from sleeping and meals scattered in between, there really is no chance for downtime. And just like everything else, I found the more often I do it, the easier it gets. I mean, my general instinct is to lock myself in a room by myself and not talk to anybody ever. Like that would probably be my happiest environment. And like if I did that, even if I do it for a little bit of time, then I want to do it again and I want to do it more. So like I could easily see myself gravitating back towards that. In my day-to-day life, my schedule is very structured. I get up at the crack of 7. I told myself when I left the corporate world, I'd never set an alarm clock before 7 o'clock again. So I get up at 7, I grab my cup of coffee, I go to my desk and I start writing. I do that first thing in the morning. I don't turn the internet on until after I get what I call the words for the day. I write about 2,000 to 3,000 words on whatever book I'm working on. Then I flip on the internet. I deal with like the business side of everything, related to being an author, interviews, contracts, talking to agents, that sort of thing. And I've got a hard stop at 3 o'clock, no matter what. One of the things that happened to me early on is when books start coming out, in multiple countries, you get interview requests at some crazy times of the day. And I used to take all of them, so I would do an interview at 11 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever I had to in order to accommodate the other side, which is exhausting. And, you can't do that for forever. Like I wouldn't be able to keep it up. So I force everybody to schedule all of that stuff before 3 p.m. 3 p.m. the quitting bell rings. I mentioned, I think we were off the air, but I live on a little island off the coast of Portsmouth up in New England. So I go for a run at 3 o'clock every day and I do a lap around the island. It's about 4.5 miles. I use that time to kind of clear my head, think about what I'm going to work on the next day. And that basically gives me the alone time that I really need. Because even though I'm at my desk, while I'm dealing with that business stuff, I'm really not alone. I'm on the phone, I'm dealing with emails, I'm texting people. There's a lot going on. So, I shut everything down. My phone's on airplane mode and I go for that, basically an hour and a half of quiet time. Then I get home and I spend the rest of the night with my wife and my family and, just try to enjoy, life a little bit. But I force myself into that routine. And I think by having it as a routine, it's very helpful.
And creating those boundaries into your day, because that, like, you as an autistic person or a neurodivergent brain, you have to have that recharge time. So I like that you are finding something very specific that's going to clear your head, and make it possible that then you are able to connect with your family later. It's also very interesting because 3 o'clock is sort of like my favorite time of the day to be like, I am done now. Like, I'm done. And so it's really interesting that you would say 3, because that's kind of when I like my day to be done. And I either can do something creative. My husband and I have a routine where at about 3 o'clock, we go sit on the patio together and we talk about anything and everything. But that's like, I need that time to be able to make it through the rest of the day. So my other question is, when you're traveling, do you have like a person who is with you? Is it your wife or a staff person who sort of is like keeping you on track? Traveling is really, I like to travel, but it's like a lot to keep track of, and I get very overwhelmed. And so I don't know that I could ever travel without somebody who could sort of like executive function all of the pieces.
Yeah, I'm lucky when it comes to that. I hate flying. If I can drive somewhere, I will hop in the car, and pretty much any kind of, if it's within 10, 12 hours or something of my house, I will drive it before I'll go to the airport. And part of that is because it's a project. Living on an island, like I have to drive off the island. I have to drive to our local airport. From the local airport, I have to take a bus to Boston Airport. Then Boston Airport, I catch my flight going wherever I need to go. So like it's a 2-hour deal just to get to and from the airport. So for me, it's a lot easier just to hop in the car and go somewhere. But for the most part, when I go on like, one of these foreign trips, I have handlers. I've got people that kind of walk me through everything, mainly just because of the profession. The business just sort of does that. I always fly business class. So a lot of times that gives you a couple extra perks. At Boston Airport, a lot of times you board your plane right from the airport lounge, so it's a lot easier. When you're business class, you don't have to deal with the same level of security. I've got clear, I've got the pre-check. I've got basically everything to buzz through all that kind of stuff really quick. Usually when I get to the destination, there's somebody standing there with a sign, or in today's world, it's an iPad with my name on it. So I walk over, they get me in a car, and then they literally just shuttle me from place to place. So I just have to physically follow them around. I have to be there. If I had to go to a foreign country all on my own and navigate those waters, I don't know that I would do it.
What about like going to the grocery store, or just going to the neighbors, or kind of things more home based? Is your wife, does she go along so that she can kind of help you navigate maybe like social situations or things like that, or have you kind of got those ones down?
Yeah, that kind of stuff I don't have a whole lot of problem with. I do all that on my own.
Chris and I talk about having to go grocery shopping all the time, and we both loathe it. It is just.
I think the biggest difference between me and my wife when we go shopping, like I know exactly what I need. Like there's a list of stuff, and before I walk through the front door of that store, I know where each of those items are located in the store. So I got my route planned out when I walk through the door of the store. I'm in and out of the grocery store in like 3 minutes. It's really fast. My wife is the exact opposite. She will get a cart at the front. She will go down up and down like every single aisle, grabbing everything that she needs. She's there for like an hour. So it's, and we've both been that, I've been this way my entire life. She's always been that way. So it's just one of those things, we don't try to change it. So if I go grocery shopping or go shopping in general with my wife, I know that that's more than likely I'm going to be in that store a lot longer than I normally would on my own.
and then you guys can kind of balance that together, or is it just like we have different styles, so we're just gonna not
A
go
lot of time
together?
what ends up happening, we don't get to go grocery shopping a whole lot anymore. We used to when we first got together, but she would essentially take the cart and she would go up and down each aisle, and like I knew exactly what we needed. So like I would zip over to this aisle, grab the bread. I would zip over here, grab this. I would go over here, grab this. So she's on maybe the third aisle, and I've already hit all the other aisles past that, knowing what we needed to get. It's fun with like now we've got our daughter, so when all three of us go, like my daughter and I kind of turn it into a fun little project and try and run around and grab all these things. But yeah, we don't try to change each other, like we did that early on, and like she knows she can't really change me, I can't really change her, so after 10 years you just learn to deal.
Yeah, I think being able to order groceries and pick them up was like the best thing ever. That's just
we do that quite a bit too, especially lately, being in New England with the weather. If it's a little snowy out or whatever, you order it on your phone, it's at your front door in an hour. That's
I
kind of
know.
nice. You get a little spoiled,
Right?
Yeah, or ordering groceries through an app. And I just always do the pickup. Like, I don't mind driving to the store if they're going to bring it to the car, because I'm like, okay, great. I don't have to get out of the safety and comfort of my car, then that's fine. But a lot of the times I do all of the grocery ordering, and then my husband, who has no issues at all going anywhere, he's very adventurous, but he'll be like, no, I'll go get it, and he's probably got other stuff to do. And so that's one of those like things that we've built into our life to help balance. Okay, if I have to go to the store and go in, all of that like masking and that character that I would have to put on, and the sensory overload, it's like I get home and then like the day is done. I have to take a nap. It's over. So that's one of the ways we can balance that.
Yeah, I mean, I again, I try to put myself in awkward situations, just because the more often I do it, the easier it gets. So like if I found that going to the store was something that was traumatic for me or difficult for me, I would probably go to the store more often, just because I'm weird like that.
Oh, it's not being weird. It's just the way it is. I just can't, like, it would just take so much energy. Like Kerissa said, for me personally, I would be done.
But I also think that there's part of like there is a challenge, or like a desire to learn more and overcome. And so I can definitely see like there's certain things where I would be like, okay, I'm going to do it. I have to try. I want to learn, and so I can figure it out so that next time it is easier. And so I definitely can see that as well.
I've got selfish reasons for wanting to do it too. I mean, being an author, I always need new characters, and like I can't find new characters if I don't see them in real life. So, going to the gas station, going to the grocery store, you'd be surprised. It doesn't take much to inspire a particular character for a book.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, one of the things I used to do very early on when I was learning to write dialogue, I would go to like a coffee shop, like a Starbucks, and just hang out at a table. And I would kind of eavesdrop on the table next to me, and I would write down, like I would type up the dialogue, basically whatever they were saying at the next table over, because I wanted to physically see what that looked like on paper. And I teach a lot of authors today, and it's a great way to learn how to write, like the spoken word, because a lot of authors, when they first learn or try to write dialogue, it's terrible. If you were to take it and then read it out loud, it's like nobody would ever say that. So you have to practice it.
So we'd call that,
you're not going to get it watching TV,
right? We would probably call that like autistic inertia, right? Where we're able to steer ourselves into those kinds of situations because it's in our flow already. It's the payoff for you is you are going to be exposed to possible new characters for what you're writing about.
Yep.
Interesting. It's fascinating.
Yes. So I also have to share that Nancy Drew and Hardy Boy books are one of my special interests and one of like my absolute favorite things. And I have the full collection of Nancy Drew, and I'm working on my Hardy Boy collection, but that's something I love to share with my kids, because being dyslexic and growing up that way and not knowing it, reading was very challenging for me. And so Nancy Drew was one of the first series of books that I felt interested in enough that I could kind of struggle through the challenges of reading. And so I have read all of the Nancy Drew, not all of the Hardy Boy yet, because I read through those with my son, but those are such fantastic.
I've been buying them all up too. I've got a list of the ones that I'm missing. So every time I go to like a used bookstore, I seek out those last couple of titles, and I've got almost all of them. But you know, there's a few that are elusive. My daughter is still struggling with reading. She's getting a lot better. She's 7 now. She's reading The Wild Robot, which is, you know, it's just a movie. She's reading that whole series with her mom. But I've got the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews. My wife picked up a couple series that she liked when she was younger. I just bought a bunch of Encyclopedia Browns. I don't know if you remember those.
Oh, yes. Encyclopedia
I used to
Brown.
I used to love those. So I've got those. They're like all ready and waiting for her on the bookshelf when she gets to the point where she can read them.
And, you know, just like you, my son was hyperlexic. He taught himself to read before he was 3 with full comprehension. But he doesn't read for enjoyment. I devoured books as a child. So it can be frustrating for me that it's like, dude, these are really cool books. These are stories.
He might come around. I mean, maybe. For me, it was an escape, you know, like
that's what it was for me.
You could open a cover and like all of a sudden you're in a different world with different people, and you could get lost in that. And, you know, back when I was reading, especially at the early days, you know, I wanted to get away from the real world.
And you know, there's a lot of studies coming out about prolific, I'm saying that wrong. Anyway, readers, autistic readers who read a lot as children, it was just a way to cope. You know, it's just that escapism, because real life and trying to figure out all the social rules and norms were just too difficult. So intense reading was, one of the things.
And that's what it is for me. Like I love to read because it's easier to go and be in that other world than, you know, it can be in the one that I'm having to do right now. And so I love that. I love audiobooks. Audiobooks are like my obsession right now. And I just love to be able to skip out into that other place, and I'm like, those characters are my friends, and just getting to be in that other world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I love detective stories, and I know that you have a detective that you like to write about. So does that come back from that love of Nancy Drew?
I'm sure that's probably where it started, you know, because a lot of those things are similar. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I write books is the same reason I used to read, is that escapism. The difference is if I'm the one writing them, I can create the world that I'm going to get lost in. You know, I can surround myself with people that I want to be around. You know, I can basically make up my own audience. So it kind of takes it all to a whole other level.
So when you're not writing, what are your favorite books to read for yourself, for your own enjoyment?
It's funny because when you start selling a lot of books, all the publishers start sending you free books because they want you to give them a little quote to put on the cover. So I kind of get like every new release coming out mailed to me. My personal favorites have always been the same. I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I always have been. I've gotten to know him a little bit since I started writing.
He's written my
Nice
favorite
guy.
book. My favorite book is The Stand.
Yeah,
and it has been.
His writing it's one of those things, I read every one of his books first as a fan, and then I go back through it with a highlighter, just to figure out how he does certain things, because he's able to create like a character in like 2 or 3 sentences. That is not an easy thing to do. So I study his writing, all the time. I'm a huge Dean Koontz fan. I've been reading him forever. I know Dean pretty well. He sends me all of his books before they come out, and I've yet to spot a mistake in him. He has got to be the biggest perfectionist on the planet. Writing with James Patterson has been fantastic. He's taught me a ton. I was reading him for years, long before I started working with the guy. So I think in a lot of ways I surround myself with these people, partly because I can learn from all of them, but also because I enjoy the craft. I enjoy the books that they put out.
Yeah.
Well, it's just so incredible to get to see someone who lives their authentic autistic neurodivergent life, and but still be able to go out and do really big things. And that's something that Heather and I are really passionate about, is when we get connected in with parents of autistic kids, so often those parents and those families will feel very discouraged, and autism almost has this stigma of they'll never be able to do anything. They can never go out in the world. They'll never have a job. They'll never have friends. They'll never get married. They'll never have a family. And so part of what we're doing and part of our message is to encourage individuals and parents that you can do really incredible things as an autistic person. And it's just absolutely wonderful to get to hear you talk about the things that were hard, and how you sort of channeled all of those great things to go out and to do so much. And I'm so thankful for you to want to share all of that with Heather and I, and with all of our community, because I think it's so important to hear.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, when I was younger, even when I first got diagnosed, like these types of stories weren't out there. Like you could find them if you really dug really hard. But I've met a lot of parents over the years, where they've got an autistic child at home that's a year old or 2 years old, and like their kid's not talking, their kid's beating its head against the wall till it bleeds, and screaming for no reason, doesn't like to be touched, all these different things. And like, if you're a parent and you're dealing with that, it can be extremely overwhelming. So, and I was that kid, at one point. So for me, it's important to get out there just to talk to those parents, to show them that there is a light at the end of that tunnel. A lot of times, if you can just relate with your child enough to figure out what is that one thing that they really do like, what is it they enjoy. I mean, whenever I sit down with an autistic child, I play with them for a little bit, there's always something that just sort of jumps out. And it could be that they're building, they like music, they like this, they like that. But once you can figure that out, and you can use that as a communication tool, you can open that door, and your child will relate to you. They will want to talk to you about it. And the more you talk about whatever that one particular thing is, you can get them to open up about other things. And that's essentially where the whole healing process starts. And it, for the longest time, when I wasn't sure I was even going to speak about autism, but as the book started selling, I just realized there are a lot of people out there that would really benefit from hearing my side of this. So as difficult as it is sometimes to get out there and talk about it, I felt like I needed to.
But it's needed. So we really thank you for going into that little bit of an uncomfortable spot. But again, the more voices that are out there, the more positive experiences that can be shared. Because when we get those diagnoses as a parent and our children are diagnosed autistic, there's a lot of fear. I mean, it's all fear-based. So getting the message out there that it's going to be okay. Like it's going to be okay.
Yes.
It's really, really important. And we really appreciate you being willing to come on and talk to us about that.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate the hope and the encouragement, and that you're kind of using all of your talents to shine a light on the positive of being autistic and being that positive autistic role model out there. And so thank you for spending time with Heather and I.
Just us little two moms with a microphone.
Yeah.
And thanks. So we really appreciate it.
Yes. And we will include in the description information on how people can learn more about you, learn about your books, and
all of the things.
Yeah,
we will
all
put
the
all of
things.
the things in there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for being on. We really appreciate it. This has been fantastic.
Yeah. And for anyone who would like to learn more about Journeys with PDA, you can visit our website at journeyswithpda.com and follow us on our social media. And if you are interested in learning about pathological demand avoidance, autism profile, or what it's like to be a late diagnosed autistic adult, visit our website and reach out to us.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.